Good evening. My name is Jorn Weisbrod. I'm the Artistic Director of the Luminato Festival, and welcome to our second TimesTalks Luminato. Tonight we had Robert Wilson and Willem Dafoe talking with John Rockwell, and tonight we have Robin Pogrebin and Liz Diller. Unfortunately, Rick Scofidio had to stay behind in New York because of urgent work that he had to do over the weekend. But there we have two ladies talking, which I'm sure will be quite amazing. I'm really very, very proud about this relationship with the New York Times and really excited that we're sort of kicking off this relationship. The TimesTalks have been going on for, I think, almost 20 years. And this is the first installment of TimesTalks in Canada, in Toronto, and this talk today is going to be live streamed on the New York Times webpage and also on our webpage, and will also continue to live in the archives. So this festival and Toronto is sort of entering the world of the New York Times, and the Times is really one of the, I think, great sort of newspapers of today who really understood that the future is digital. I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners for this festival, L'Oréal Canada, Luminato's partner in creativity, our founding government partner, the province of Ontario. No applause. You know, in the last talk, yeah, in the last introduction that I made, there was a big applause when I said Ontario, so I thought, aren't you from Ontario? And our major partner, the Government of Canada, and of course all the individual supporters, foundations, corporate and media partners that support this festival. There's much more, obviously, to this festival. To me, a festival is sort of like an orchestra where you have individual players and they all come together to create a much larger sound. So I also encourage you to come to our festival hub at David Pico Square, where actually this afternoon, for the first time, we could fly an installation by Michel de Bruyne, which is a gigantic mirror ball, which is 26 feet in diameter. 26 feet is probably from there to there, so just imagine I'm a mirror ball. And it flies in 80 feet height. I hope it's going to go up tonight. It always depends on the wind speeds, and will be lit. So the city of Toronto is really going to sparkle and dazzle over the next 10 days. I would like to now invite Carol Day from the Times to come up on stage and introduce our two panelists. Carol.
Thanks, everyone. The New York Times is so delighted to be here in Toronto for the Luminato Festival, and it's been great to work with Jorn and everyone here, and wonderful also to be able to live stream on nytimes.com/artsbeat, which is our popular arts blog. And fabulous, too, to bring all our journalists here, 4 of our esteemed journalists, one of whom is here with us to interview the architect who's been responsible for bringing so much to so many places around the world, and also especially to New York. And our interviewer will tell you much more about her and her work, but I want to tell you about our interviewer. Robin Pogrebin is the first architecture reporter for the New York Times. She covers cultural institutions and architecture and many other things for the paper, for the arts pages, but her status as the architecture reporter makes her the perfect person to interview our guest. So please join me in welcoming Liz Diller and Robin Pogrebin. Thank you.
Thank you all for a nice welcome. It is great to be here, and we're both happy to have flown into Toronto for this festival and be part of it. Liz is has been under the weather, so I'm particularly thrilled that she made it. And I was saying that this hasn't, usually when I do these, it requires a lot of homework. And, for over a decade, I have been covering the field of architecture and cultural institutions, and so I feel like I've been following Liz every step of the way. So we will kind of hit on a lot of the highlights of what she's done, but clearly Lincoln Center, the entire $1.2 billion overhaul of that campus was Liz. The High Line, which has kind of revolutionized the way people think about old railroad lines, is Liz, and her firm, obviously Diller Scofidio and Renfro. And it's become almost a joke in my office that every project, when I find myself on deadline having to cover who got this commission, it's Liz again. And always makes me wonder how she possibly manages to do it all, and hopefully we'll touch on that a little bit too. And the way I want to do this in terms of the format is really have this be a conversation back and forth with Liz and I. She fortunately brought slides so we can look at some of the work as we talk about it, and leave time for some of your questions. And when we do, there are mics on either side. And I just want to say in advance, if you can make those questions, not just comments, that helps us a lot. If they're really queries, that would be great. So be thinking of those as we talk. So I guess to start with, I thought we should start with our hometown. A lot has been going on there. And perhaps just to start with Lincoln Center, which was kind of officially finished in the fall, and it has so many different components. I mean, it's, the iconic fountain was redone and kind of streamlined. It's much more elegant now. There's a whole new entrance that's much more welcoming. Alice Tully Hall has been transformed. Hopefully, if any of you, if you haven't been there, it's worth going to see. So I guess to talk with Liz about, I know the mandate from Lincoln Center was this was sort of an ivory tower on a plinth, and they really wanted to open it up, make it feel more inviting, less intimidating, more porous, more transparent. So that was her brief. How did you go about it?
Well, it really started as a kind of a call to maybe 5 architects, of which we were the ones that were least qualified. And we had done some work in media, in public spaces, and the person that was in charge of Lincoln Center Development Project thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have them take a look at turning the halls inside out, because there's so much activity happening inside of all of those venues. And the moment you look into the public spaces or the streets surrounding Lincoln Center, it's totally dead, forbidding. It was done, it was executed in a time of urban renewal.
1960s.
And then, it was planned in the late 50s. And then executed in the 60s. And actually, I could show these guys were involved in the
That
initial
sort of
project.
says it all, like them and you.
Exactly. There's a lot of testosterone up there. We inherited it, with all of its kind of interests, but also major flaws. So
And that includes some heavyweights like Philip Johnson.
Philip
Right.
Johnson, Harrison, Abramowitz, Breuer was involved initially, even Alto. But they fled because of an initial tide of postmodernism that was actually coming through. And Philip Johnson was very interested in the historical illusion for the first time. And then what came out of this, what was called monumental modernism. It was very classically oriented, like this, and which I have to say is quite a beautiful and still relevant image in a sense. This is Lincoln Center at its best, when all the theaters pour out at intermission and there's a kind of great buzz. But this is actually the Lincoln Center that we inherited, which is basically built on a plinth. And the plinth is very solid, and this was a 200-foot-long plaza that spanned 65th Street. And under the plinth was the parking garage and the central mechanical plant. And it's really a product of 60s planning for a suburban culture, and also a very defensive posture toward the neighborhood, which was poor at the time. So there was a kind of haves and have-nots divided by this very kind of sanitized a place that was built. And I juxtapose this because the connection between the two sides of 65th Street still had to be made, and we did it with a very small pedestrian bridge. And before, it was this 200-foot-long bridge. And it obscured entrances to the Juilliard Theater and to Lincoln Center Theater, where so many people came through. So it was unsafe, it was unglamorous. And the mandate was to somehow bring the energies from the inside to the outside. So when we interviewed for this, we kind of went crazy. We showed a lot of different things. We had nothing to lose because we're the most unlikely to actually get it. And I think that there was something that it was a kind of healthy amount of naivete with a kind of relentless sense that we wanted to do something, we were going to stick it out, and we actually knew the site very, very well. We came there for performances all the time. That we got it, and then we started to do our work. And like that first slide that I showed, there are many, many locations of the renovation, and there's new construction, and then there's transformations, and it's all different. We liken it to to like organ transplants, to tummy tucks, to lip jobs. They're all different levels of intervention there, and it grew very organically. It wasn't a master plan. It just kept going for about 10 years.
And part of it seems to be that they gained so much confidence in you that so everyone's like, do my thing, do my thing.
Exactly.
Does it feel like that to you? That more as people began to see on campus, you have like 12 constituent groups, that this was such an improvement. They all wanted in.
Well, in fact, there was a South Campus group and a North Campus group, and the South Campus were all around the the Metropolitan and the Philharmonic and New York State Theater, and they felt like their campus was perfect. Then there was the North Campus with Juilliard and School of American Ballet and Film Society and Lincoln Center Theater and all of those groups, and they're the ones that really felt like they needed the change. Once we started to make the change for the North group, the South group said, well, we could use a little bit of that. What can you do for us? And in fact, I think I put together some before and afters. So this was Juilliard came at some point in time where we made an expansion and also transformation of the Alice Tully Hall and the box office and entrance. And
you should just note also that you can see dancers in the studio through that window that's in the prow, right?
Yeah, the Juilliard kids were very frustrated that they were actually, it was a Beluski building, and it's considered to be one of the best examples of brutalism in the United States. But the problem was it was very, very internally focused, like a monastery. And those students really just wanted contact. They wanted daylight, and they wanted contact. I think Robin Williams said something like, Juilliard is just like a prison with cellos. And, you know, it's really the way those people felt. It was really horrible. I mean, there's really no social space. The facilities were 50 years old, very institutional feeling, kind of nasty. And we changed everything up for them. We built out another 55,000 square feet, and we changed their entrance. I'll just go through a couple of slides. This is Tully Hall. This was our first concert hall. This is now the entrance to Juilliard, and before they really didn't have a proper entrance. And it all started for them at the entrance. Just one of the most important conservatories in the world that actually had no street presence. So
Lincoln Center Theater as well. Do you have a slide of that? They didn't really have a marquee before. Now
no,
they
but
do.
it was I'll show you if I back up. And if I can point, this, I believe, no, it's right here.
Yeah.
It's cut off right under this 200-foot-long overpass. 50% of the population to Lincoln Center Theater came in that route.
Risked their lives.
Risked their lives, and you know, a lot of fast cars and very smelly. But it wasn't. There were a lot of interesting motivations here. Lincoln Center's patrons are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're falling off. And Lincoln Center leadership is starting to really, and for a while, it's been thinking about how the programming is going to shift. How could classical arts actually appeal to new audiences? How to change the programming, and a lot of the directors, artistic directors, and leadership of Lincoln Center has been going through an evolution, like the Metropolitan Opera and the New York Philharmonic, and so forth. So it's, you know, I have to say that I'm proud of the fact that architecture contributed to a transformation, but it really starts with what goes on stage. And so once you start getting new programming, adventurous programming, and you give patrons a reason to go there if they actually can't afford $300 for Met tickets, they can still go there. Or people that can afford to go to some of the concerts. Some of the concerts are free and open air, and some of them are, you know, are not cheap. But Lincoln Center has been very, very mindful of its publicness, which, frankly, for a long time, it lost a little bit sight of.
Part of that also is they wanted to make it much more 24/7, so that even if you aren't drawn by what's on the stages, you're coming to sit on the steps, you're coming to sit in the atrium. I mean, the kind of the grass grate. I don't know if you have a picture of the triangle you created.
Yeah, I have one coming.
There are a lot more places to hang out now, and it's much more inviting as just a social space.
Yeah, so this is the before on the North Plaza, which is really a wonderful plaza. Actually, when it was designed, and then it just became really bleak. And this is the after.
That's a restaurant with a grass roof.
Grass roof that is
you can sit
also it touches the ground and makes contact at one point, and then it flies into the air, and it's kind of a urban meadow
oasis.
Yeah, and it faces the pool, which has the Henry Moore sculpture, and performances are staged on that. And one of the places that I want to actually show, because I'm particularly proud of this. This is the interface with Columbus Avenue. So if you're arriving by foot and you've braved 11 lanes of traffic crossing the street, then there's a little sidewalk, a couple of steps, mean steps, to get to this heightened plaza level, and then you get run over by 2 more lanes of traffic. and then after that, Jersey
That's how it
barriers.
used to be.
That's how it used to be. And there was a lot of discussion about dropping patrons off at the level of the plaza, which is just 4 feet up. And Philip Johnson, in the very earliest iteration of this project, actually had the cars dropping off in front of the venues, very suburban style. So the cars came all the way inside of the plaza. We couldn't find those drawings, but we had heard about those. So this was as close as he was able to bring the patrons. We felt that this was a very mean entrance, it was a very mean interface, and it wasn't appropriate for the scale of the project. And so what we did was something very, very simple. We took that road and we depressed it to the concourse level. There's a level below ground, which is also connects up to all the buildings. And then we took the stair and we stretched it and we enhanced the sidewalk, enlarged the sidewalk.
You lit up the stairs.
And we lit up the stairs actually with, and so this is it's very thin, actually, because it's a porte cochere, it's a bridge, and there. And so the front face of all of the risers is animated LEDs, which announce everything that's going on and talks
They
to
used
everyone
to say
in different
welcome
language.
in different languages.
It
Do they
does,
still?
in like 300 languages. And so for us, this is now taking on this very monumental structure, the 50s and 60s notion of a kind of classical modernism, and actually completing it. I mean, we thought that it actually never got finished the right way. It needed a monumental entrance, and so we gave it one, but we did it on our terms. So it appears to be a big, solid stair that goes up to that plinth level, but in fact it's very thin, you could drive under it, and it's electronic, and so it becomes dematerialized. So for us, it was always that kind of, all of that Lincoln Center work was being on both sides of the fence. It was reading the DNA of Lincoln Center and not wanting to fly in something entirely alien into it, but kind of riff off of what was already there and make it just, stronger, better, and a little bit different. And so there's a kind of cohesiveness of all of these interventions that are spread out across 16 acres. But there's no master plan.
I think what's interesting about it is it all sounds easy now, but there were a lot of growing pains. One strain is that there's actually been a real sort of awareness about 1960s modernist architecture and a movement to preserve things. And there was a lot of controversy over 2 Columbus Circle, which is nearby. And I'm interested to hear what kind of pushback you got from the preservationists. But also you had 12 constituents, and people used to talk about that Lincoln Center as a dysfunctional family. There was a lot of infighting around the original planning of this. And there were a lot of, crazy ideas. Like I remember Frank Gehry even suggested enclosing the plaza, which would have been insane with glass. So how did you navigate all of that kind of rocky terrain?
I have to say, when I look back on the fact that we accomplished all this stuff, I cannot believe how we did it. And it was kind of chutzpah and naivete and just energy. I never, I always thought, well, first of all, I have to explain that there are 12 constituent organizations. Each has an artistic director, general manager, and a board. And they vie for the same philanthropic dollars.
It's the Met, the New York City Ballet, the Philharmonic, the Chamber Music Society, etc.
Right, etc. So there are 12 of them, and they have a governance whereby in order to make any change in public spaces, they have to be unanimous, not one dissenting vote. So
Gasp.
and it's really crazy. So what happened was there was a South Campus group and a North Campus group, and there was a little bit of help with Lincoln Center leadership. As a great president, and also these chairmen that were ahead of all of these, the smaller groups of constituent organizations. But it took an enormous amount of energy to actually get them on the same page. Because
Diplomacy.
Diplomacy, a lot of diplomacy. I used to complain about, also I have to say that there's more. There's also
City government.
There was city there was city government. There was a city task force
Right.
on this because there's city dollars that
Because
were given to
Lincoln
it.
Center is on city-owned land.
Partially on
Right,
city
not all of it.
land. So we had to get, all the commissions, all the commissioners on board. So we had to constantly be presenting and getting approvals from the special task force. There was only one other task force like this, which was at World Trade Center. Then there was the preservationists. There were the preservationists, and there was a lot of concern about the Dan Kiley North Plaza site,
That's the
and
reflecting pool.
the reflecting pole, all of that stuff. There wasn't a huge amount of love for some of these buildings because they got panned when they opened because it was really anti-modern at that time.
But how about talk about the fountain? Because you wanted to go a little further than you went.
We did. The fountain, which I think I show here, it has always been, it was based on a Campidoglio. And this was, again, another reference back to the Renaissance that somehow the architects here decided to start to use historical quotes. So central fountain with all these radiating spokes. We thought that it would be really nice to distribute the fountain and just serialize it and disperse it on the whole quadrangle of the site. Well, that didn't go over very well, but it could be digitized, so you can get.
Do you
central
mean lots of
fountain.
different fountains?
Lots of different fountains, just going up all over the place. It could be, you could redistribute where the center was, depending on what was other activities that were happening. We also had one that I particularly loved. Actually, was on axis with a Met. And it was linear, and it looked like a lawn sprinkler, just basically kind of moved like this. But
Oh,
in
I
a-
like that one.
in a
Yes.
line. And a lot of our ideas on this didn't really go very far because they felt this was the most sensitive part of the site.
Would have been sacrilege.
It was the icon. And so what we did was something very simple. We moved the water level, which was dammed up, and it was about that high, and you would sit on the rim. And we just pushed the water level down. We totally changed out the waterworks. And we sunk it to be flush with the surface of the plaza. And then we took the rim, which is identical in its circumference and its dimensions, width and height, and we just floated it and uplit it so that you can actually see the water through. And we designed a water show, and we
A
had
guy
this-
from Las Vegas, right?
Right,
Consulted.
wet design. Yeah, we had this fantasy that we could do all these things with water that you actually couldn't do. Like we wanted to make a pancake, like this flat, circle of water that would just go up and down and things like that. But anyway, we learned a lot about water in the process. But so there was, there were a lot of interest around this, and many more that I'm not. Many stakeholders in this. And I used to talk about all the meetings that we would go through. Just 15 meetings a week. We hardly had any time to design. And I remember complaining about the 99% perspiration to 1% inspiration, that cliche. Sometime around the middle of this project, I realized that that 99% was just as creative as the 1%. To be able to turn all those people around, to be able to educate them, to be able to really talk to them and bring them into a cooperative mood, to have them understand that what's good for one and what's good for the campus is good for everyone, which was not part of Lincoln Center mentality.
They competed with each other.
They did. They competed with each other all the time. They didn't have any centralized box office. They didn't have really a functional website, and it was very, very fragmented. I think that when you go back to the very initial founding of Lincoln Center, it was really quite amazing that back in the 50s, when they decided to centralize the arts into one spot, it was immensely unpopular. The notion of not dispersing the arts around the city, but putting them all in one spot. And, we could probably have that conversation today and actually feel the same way. Like, why would you do that? Is that a good thing to do? The other side of that argument is synergy, right? That there's something to being in proximity to these other art forms. And it's possible that when people get over their siloism of, you know, the orchestra is over there, and the opera is over there, and the ballet is over there, that they can actually do things together. And this was at the very beginning of Lincoln Center. They tried to do that more. And I think it has, over the years, it's been there more than we recognize, but it's not overt in any way. Now I think with new, younger artistic directors, there's much more of an interdisciplinary approach.
And a sense of common pride in the place among them.
Exactly. And there are more things that happen out of doors, and it feels like there's something different going on. And
some of them are even collaborating artistically now in ways that they hadn't before. So I think this has been part of that, fostering that.
And that's, the bottom line, that's the most important thing, is to be able to transpose the stage to the public spaces and public spaces to the stage, and that the theater of the theater is just as interesting. Whether you're on or off stage, the whole space is starting to perform.
I want to move on from Lincoln Center, but just before we leave it, there was one big element that was left out of the project because they didn't get their act together, and that's Avery Fisher Hall. And I just wonder, would you do it? And, are you tempted? Would you like very much to do it?
Are you giving it away? Well, it's the biggest secret right now. So then maybe it's not such a secret. They are planning to do an entire renovation of Avery Fisher Hall. Since it opened, the acoustics have been problematic. It's not the most attractive hall. In fact, it feels really big. And when they stage mostly Mozart, and they put more of a thrust in there, and they have the audience sitting around, it feels entirely different. And you could imagine what a new organization of that space could start to produce. And Alan Gilbert is really a great conductor, and they have a great new manager, and it really feels like there's something new that's going to happen there. So they're starting in a very slow way. They're not opening it up to architects yet. They're starting with producing a program and then getting their acoustic development, and then once the criteria are set, they're going to do something. They may have a competition, I don't know. If anyone calls us, we're
You're
around.
ready to go.
We're ready to go.
The High Line, which is great. What's interesting is that Lincoln Center, the world is sort of watching, and one of these interesting things is not only I think Lincoln Center was decisive for Liz's career because they are literally the go-to architects now, but that other cultural centers were like, we wanted to do that and kind of re-energize our facilities too in a way that feels kind of larger than the architecture. Similarly, the High Line has become a kind of template, and there are High Lines sort of popping up all over the place now. Talk about how this came about, and obviously this is a lot more involved with landscape, which is interesting. It's hard for some people to understand, where is the architecture here?
So the High Line was always considered like a great architectural problem in architecture school. And I remember when I was teaching and when I was even in school, there were some experiments on the High Line. So it officially closed in 80.
We should say what it is. It's an abandoned railway.
Yeah.
How long is it exactly?
It's about a mile and a half, and it's on the west side of Manhattan, just parallel to the river, and then it goes around Hudson Yards. It was used for the delivery of freight from the railroads and also shipping to the light industrial areas around the west side, meatpacking district. The very last train car was filled with frozen turkeys, as I remember. And then it kind of got abandoned for many, many years. And so that's when it became kind of like a free-for-all. And when Giuliani, there was a lot of pressure on this side of Manhattan to tear it down, and all the properties around it are, the chop shops or garages, or there are a lot of open parking lots. It's very abject and kind of interesting and kind of nasty
Gritty.
New York,
Yeah.
gritty. I kind of love it, or loved it. Anyway, that's gone. But at that time, it was the very first thing was, I think Dia came there in the early 80s.
Art gallery.
Yeah, the Art Foundation, and then very slowly galleries started popping up. Artists actually started to move there because the rents were cheap.
Lower.
And eventually, the Friends of the Highline, which is a kind of activist young group of guys that Robert Hammond, Joshua David, decided. They went to a community meeting, and there was discussion about wrecking the Highline. And in Giuliani's administration, there was a lot of pressure from developers to tear it down, so that the land value would be raised in that area. And so in his last act as mayor, Giuliani signed the demolition order. And the moment that Bloomberg came on, it was reversed. And Bloomberg's administration, I have to really credit the administration for a lot of things. Also, the successes that we've had in New York, very much timed with a very progressive administration that was very much public space oriented. Developer oriented too, but also public space. And so this park was championed by Amanda Burton, and there was an ideas competition. And
She's the planning commissioner, chairman of city planning.
Exactly. After the ideas competition, which just kind of put forward a lot of student ideas, you know, and very like one-liner-ish things, there was an actual invited competition for a number of architects. It was shortlisted. We were shortlisted, and we were on a team with James Corner. So we decided to partner. This is field operations, and
his emphasis is landscape, isn't it?
their emphasis is landscape. And but they do borderline things, and we also do borderline things. So we decided that we would go in together and we would come up with an idea. And there was no division of the disciplines when we put an idea forward. So the competition was judged, and we won, and that turned into a project. And it was really, I think we just hit a nerve with those guys, the Friends of the Highline and Amanda. And the idea, actually, I have some thoughts. We were very much inspired by the way it went to ruin. Actually, a lot of seeds that were airborne, that came off the sea containers, the shipping containers, were basically just took root there in the ballast. And depending on the site conditions, some were windswept, some were sun-drenched, some were very shady and wet, and so forth. These various weeds basically started to grow. And so there's some native species and some foreign species. And we were also very much inspired by the way these natural kind of decay and rebirth cycles happen in nature. Nature overcoming civilization, overcoming nature, and so forth. And we kind of felt that this was kind of a beautiful thing that happened. How do we bring the public up there without killing it? And so the idea that was born very, very early was basically to digitize the surface with planks and with green. And the planks would be very long and narrow, and they would taper, and they would take different configurations. And they would be put together in different ways that would allow the growth to come up in between the seams. And so it was really all about the cracks between the solids. And so we were able to, with this system, make any gradient from 100% green to 100% hardscape and everything in between. And so we were able to actually not make just a path for people and a space just for the biological material, but it just kind of wove together. And the language was very, very simple. This planking, it just went through everything. We developed it into benches and seating. The lighting was in the guardrails were already there. So it's a very light touch of architecture. Actually,
because there's still some plants like poking up through the ground in the way they used to in the tracks.
Exactly.
You kept some of that.
And in fact, this, and then we also repurposed some of the industrial stuff for leisure. And this is one of the spurs that was there over 10th Avenue, and we just built out some seating over 10th Avenue and glazed it and produced a little theatrical moment for people to observe traffic. One of the things that we talk about a lot is, and that we realize part of the success of the High Line is that we've introduced New Yorkers to the notion of doing nothing. And this is like a foreign concept among New Yorkites. You're either, if you're not working or burning calories or on your device, well, I don't know what else you're doing. But here, you actually can't do anything. Like, nothing is allowed. So you either are sitting or you're strolling. And it's kind of brought back a very old-fashioned idea.
I think what else it's done is it's reintroduced New Yorkers to New York in a certain way, where this is a vantage point they never had before, and they're kind of amazed to rediscover the city in terms of the views they see and how tranquil it feels and sort of verdant in the midst of all this urbanism. And it's, I should say, for those of you who haven't been there, it's become such a happening where there's huge crowds to get up there, and people, and now so much development around it because it's become. And then the Whitney Museum is opening at the base of it, with the building by Renzo Piano. But can you show some of the development that how it's attracted, been a magnet?
So it was originally argued, and the way, very much the way Central Park was argued to the city, that it would be a catalyst for development. You always have to have an economic angle on these things. So it was the far west side was very underdeveloped, and little did we know that it would that those sites would explode, and those sites are constantly flipping. Actually, not. So far, the bad economy has prevented too many new developments there, but they're really starting, and there are a lot of brand name architects all over. And but what's happened, and maybe it's a victim of its own success that there are too many people. Still great on weekdays, don't go on weekends. But what's interesting is it's produced this High Line effect, which no one would have predicted. And Promenade Plantée preceded in Paris the High Line, but it was very unknown. And somehow the High Line really hit the chord. And I think it was because it was so abject. It was really about exposing the infrastructure. And you're seeing the sides of things, the backs of things, and these new viewing corridors that
and
you
also
never...
reuse, like the fact that you can take something that you had given up on
and
reanimate it.
And also, what we try to do is preserve a sense of that melancholia of looking a little bit back at a lost history. We'll never recuperate that. And a lot of people that really used these industrial spaces are a lot of artists. That whole artist community feels very nostalgic towards it. And
in fact, we should say that people moved to that area because they got priced out of Soho, and now they're priced out of Chelsea because of these.
And then they moved to Brooklyn. They got priced out of Brooklyn. Now they're in South Bronx, I think. But what's happened on the very, very positive side is that it spawned this effect where many cities around the globe are looking at their infrastructure and saying, well, maybe something can happen here also. And so we just started to collect some of these high lines from different parts of the world, and we're still collecting them. We don't have a complete list, but it's kind of amazing. And I don't know if anyone will ever reproduce. Every city is really unique, and you have to read between the lines in every city and figure out what could be done there. So you can't get a High Line. I mean, High Line is really about these crazy super juxtapositions of things that don't belong together. And so you couldn't really find that anywhere else. But this kind of rethinking infrastructure, which is a part of historic preservation that hasn't really flourished. So
it also has a tremendous constituency of support. It's become very chic to support the High Line. So whatever made that work has certainly helped. one of the things I just, I wanted to run by you, since it was recently, it was in the news yesterday, and the Pritzker made a decision to not revisit the decision to exclude Denise Scott Brown from the prize when Robert Venturi, her husband, won it. And it has, prompted a whole discussion about status and sort of acknowledgement of an experience of women in architecture. So I wondered, what you thought of the Pritzker's decision, and also if you could speak to a little bit about, you're one of the few star architects, along with Zaha, who is female. Is this a sort of a hard road in that way because of gender?
Well, I have to say, Denise Scott Brown was doing it before Zaha was doing it before me, and in a way paved the road. So she was the brains there, and she absolutely deserves it, and it was a very big issue to recognize her retrospectively. The Pritzker was historically given to male, heroic, single architects, and that is the Gary Cooper syndrome, right? There's like this image of
the fountainhead.
The fountainhead, right? And you look back historically, even at modernism, of Korb, who just opened at MoMA, Mies, Frank Lloyd Wright, and there are always these single, heroic,
Genius.
testosterone-filled figures, and they were all kind of nasty guys, and you try to figure out like how they got to where they got to. They basically trampled everybody. And over the years, I think in the last decade or so, there have been many more collaborative studios. And the notion of a single name, on the masthead is, it's changed a lot. And the Pritzker has opened up to giving the prize to collaborations as well. So it's happened before. I think that just the whole nature of architecture as a collaborative discipline is continuing to change, and it's odd. On the one hand, it's gone away from the generalist mode, where the architect was the engineer, was the everything, and now you look at every project. Lincoln Center has something like 30 consultants around it. And we did it with FXVAL in collaboration, and Bayer Blender Bell, I neglected to say, and those were our executive architects, but work very collaboratively with them. And our studio is very collaborative and not really hierarchical, even though we have the last say. The principals typically angle in the last say, but ideas percolate from the bottom up and the top down. The professionalization, I would say, is bad and good. So you have the guy that's the great acoustics guy, and you have the great facade guy, and you have the great waterproofing guy, and the great code, the code guy, and so forth, and you can list them all. And so what happens is that the architect no longer feels like they have to know that stuff, or they basically buy their expertise and bring it around them. On the good side, the technologies have advanced so much. Like the engineering around facade systems is so evolved that you really need a specialty engineer that does that. And it's different usually than the engineer that puts up the structures of buildings or that does bridges. And there are different types of engineers. So there's a kind of interesting problem. I mean, I don't know what to make of it entirely, but on the good side is that we can go deeper into these specializations. We can do more than we ever have been able to do.
In terms of, just back to this topic of being a woman in the profession, you and Rick are married and have been partners for some time, and you were originally his student. What's it, a lot of, what I've noticed is the women who are in this profession are married to the men that they work with. I mean, and that maybe that's the only way to both have a life and work as hard as architects do. I mean, do you think that, can you talk a little bit about what your dynamic is and how you guys, worked out those two sides of your lives.
Well, it's interesting. When Rick was my teacher at Cooper Union, and we hooked up afterwards, and we started to do, and I put I'll just flash through some of the early projects and projects that are maybe not so early, but we've done a lot of crazy things, and they were not really architecture projects. They're this research into housework and into ironing, which produced all these very difficult to put in your drawer shirts. It didn't really fit on a hanger, or and installations that were done in museums all over the country, in different parts of the world. This is at the Cartier Foundation. And at the Whitney, there's a retrospective. We also have curated shows. This is at SF MoMA, and have done a lot of experimental work for theater. Just to show a couple of examples, and installations in public spaces. This is a World Trade Center site. This project was at that moment where we were kind of changing over. So we started to work together. There was no intention of actually having an architectural practice. And we started to do work in public spaces. And this was a kind of call to action. We just decided to, at the World Trade Center site, to make a viewing platform because so many people wanted to bear witness on the site. They couldn't get anywhere close to it because of the rescue and then the cleanup effort. And it was a time when the city was totally out of control. There was nobody minding the store. And so we quickly, with David Rockwell, who's a longtime collaborator, we put together a foundation. We raised some money, and we just made this big ramp that just kind of looked onto nothing, just a hole in the ground. And we did this kind of stuff, and in this, around the same time, the Blur building. And so Rick and I started to do this kind of work, and it started to grow, and this was maybe the largest environmental installation project we did at the Swiss Expo 2002. And it was a building made entirely of water vapor that was just pulled out of the lake and atomized. And the space inside was just a blur. Anyway, at some point, and Rick had given up his architectural practice because he felt that the architectural profession was totally intellectually bankrupt and also corrupt. So he was looking at this very, very kind of dismal gray filter. And we started doing stuff, and then we thought, well, then we got a commission here or there to do an architectural project. And it was on our terms. We never really just started to do, like many architects, you do a restaurant and a boutique, and then you start to grow your practice. We didn't do that. We were asked to do a house, and the house was won an award. It was in PA. There was the Slow House, and then one thing led to another, and that was the moment where things started to happen. We did a public housing project in Japan that was brought to us by Isosaki because of the ironing shirts project, because they thought, well, these guys are into domesticity. Why not give them a housing project? And and it somehow worked out. So we started to do more architectural work. Rick and I actually didn't get married for a long time. And New York Magazine is doing a profile on married couples. In fact, it's coming out on Monday. And they asked us when we got married, because they were doing photos of all these architects in New York that happened to be life partners. And they asked us when we got married, and I told them, well, Rick thinks it was sometime in the 80s. I thought it was sometime in the 90s. We don't know. And Justin Davidson, who's the journalist, said, thank you for pinning that down. But, the marriage meant absolutely nothing to us, and we've been together, and then we brought in a third partner, Charles Renfro.
It's amazing that that's worked. Was it bumpy at all to just have sort of an interloper suddenly?
It was just a whim. We were starting to do more architectural projects. We were starting to do the Brasserie restaurant and then the ICA. And we figured, well, if we're going to do this, now there are 6 people working for us, now there are 12, and now there are 18, and then 24, and then...
How many are there now?
It's like about 90.
I remember you told me once that when you guys started, it was in your house and everyone was using your bathroom, all your employees, and
Yeah,
going to and from.
it was, we were working out of our loft space, and as the population of our studio kept growing, it was very difficult to share your drawers, your sock drawers, your underwear drawers, and your medicine cabinet. We believed in this open loft condition where just everything was out there. It became difficult when it became 18 and 24 people. It started to get difficult. And I just realized that I was sharing my bathroom and my life with 24 people. But it was the straw that broke the camel's back was when the FedEx guy asked to use the bathroom. And I realized that it was like Grand Central Station. And so at that point, we moved out. And then our studio kept growing. And Lincoln Center was a very big part of that. It all happened really just around this time, around 2001, 2002, 2003. Even though some of, like the Slow House was 1991 project, 1989, 1990. So there was some dabbling early, but it really kind of broke out in around 2000.
And things have seemed sort of just on an upward trajectory. The one recent sort of wrench in the works seemed to be around this Hirshhorn project, which I'd love you to address. It was called The Bubble. The director of the Hirshhorn sort of staked his kind of his career on it, and the museum decided not to go forward, having failed to raise sufficient funds. So I remember talking to you, I guess, the day it happened, and you sounded incredibly heartbroken.
Yeah.
So, I mean, talk about what that was. And that seems like a combination of your more artistic side with your architectural one.
The Hirshhorn is that round donut building, and it was basically an SOM building. Gordon Bunshaft did it and finished it in '74. And it's a museum of modern and contemporary art. It's right on the National Mall, so it occupies this incredibly symbolic and important spot. And it's a site of a lot of American history, and it's the place where the public is invited to come and protest, and it's a place of public dissent. And we felt like a museum of contemporary art really ought to shake hands with the fact that it's on the mall and be a place of discourse. And the mall itself is surrounded by all these Smithsonian institutions, all these museums. And also, there are 500 think tanks and embassies in D.C. So it's a great place. But these yellow spots are all the museum institutions that basically talk in one direction. No one talks back to these, and they're usually in stone. They are symbols of authority. The Hirshhorn seemed like a great opportunity, and with Richard Koshalik as the director as of several years, and decided to really to develop something that was truly unique for the Hirshhorn and for DC. And that is to have a place of public dialogue around cultural diplomacy and culture and its relationship to politics, policy, and all of that. There was very little room around the Hirshhorn, except for the hole in the middle. And so this was intended to be a temporary, seasonal structure that would basically be inflated once a year or twice a year, and it would be folded up and stored off-site, and then it would come in and it would be inflated, and all sorts of things could take place. This was it oozed out of the top and it oozed out the sides. By the way, we argued that it was like a dome, and it was kind of like the Capitol. It had a dome on the top, but actually it was in our minds, it was like breathing in the air of the mall, the democratic air of the mall, and And this was the space, as it was envisioned, as really basically a forum. And it could also
So it had a
have different
floor,
perform.
or it was just...
It was a platform.
It was.
It was a platform because there's a pool in the center of the it was off center in that void, and the inside of this building it really wasn't used for anything, and it looked like an FBI headquarters. This was embraced by everyone. Actually, the New York Times broke it. I think it was in 2009, and it was a kind of an exuberant expression of the presence of contemporary art in that site. And it was embraced by all, and including the Smithsonian. The problem was raising the money for it.
How much?
Ultimately, the structure itself, the bubble itself, would have cost around $12 million. And that includes all of the stuff inside, the platforms and everything, because you had to protect this historic building, so you couldn't actually touch it. So we had to make implants, and we had to increase the electrical power and the structural. Actually, inflatables exert pressure in every direction, including down, and it had a basement, so there was a big force going down, and so we had to reinforce it and so forth. So when we did the engineering, the cost from the original, just the flexible part was about $5 million as initially announced. Same, but there were many improvements that had to be done. Anyway, the problem was that over time, Richard Koshalik and his board were in disagreement about this, and the board, or many members of the board, felt like the money should go toward programming and should go toward increasing the collection and so forth. Richard strongly felt that something else needed to happen, and the relevance of the Hirshhorn had to be demonstrated. He had also done some other interesting projects around that were of note, large-scale projections, and Barbara Kruger did the bookstore, and there was all sorts of really great activities. There was an Ai Weiwei show, so there was a lot going on, and there was always a kind of contest on the board, and in the end, the Smithsonian ended up not being so sure that they wanted to support it. They were going to give something like $4 million for it, and with the government lockdown on money these days, there was an interest in redistributing those funds, and so this project got less support. And frankly, Richard's board had changed over time, and there was a very, very enthusiastic group that was raising the money. Bloomberg actually had put in money, and we were very close, and then it got chopped, and this just happened a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's really heartbreaking because this was entirely engineered. It was
Ready to
very
go.
very close to being ready to go.
Questions? 2 mics. People who have them, speak up and be bold. Yes.
We've heard a lot about New York today. What do you know about Toronto structures, Toronto architects, Toronto architectural firms? What kind of presence does it have?
I have friends here that are architects, and I have to say that the school, the University of Toronto School of Architecture, is well known, and there's exchange that goes on between the school. There was a wonderful competition to do something on the Gardner Highway, on the expressway, and then it got stopped, and we were involved in that, and that was unfortunate, but there was an internationalism that went back and forth. But I have to say that there could be more, and I don't know. I wish I knew more, and I could elaborate on my thoughts about Toronto architecture or Toronto transformation, but I can't exactly do that. I could say that I came into town last night, and I wish I could see more people. It's very much the way of downtowns, or even New York. Midtown, pretty empty.
At night, on a
and-
weekday.
Yeah, at night, yeah. And very much alive in the day.
I should add to it, though, that I have always thought of doing a piece on Toronto architecture recently because it seems like a lot is happening here. Frank Gehry and
Oh, yeah.
the guy who did the master plan for the World Trade Center, Liebskin. Doesn't
Oh,
he have
Liebskin,
something
yeah.
there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for coming here. And I just want to say I love the Blur building. I never saw, but every time I see images, I just get so excited. And I was wondering if you could speak briefly about the brainstorming for that idea and possibly a little bit of the science behind the building.
About this.
The science behind the building, how it all.
Do you know which building she's asking about?
The Blur building.
Yeah.
Yes.
The signs?
Science.
Science, oh, the science. Oh,
And just
great,
the
great
brainstorming
question.
behind it as
Yeah.
well. I just think it's a great project.
Well, it was also a competition, and Pippola Tourist was in charge of the Swiss Expo in general, and it was an art expo, which is very different from a lot of these expos that are more science-oriented and industry-oriented, nationalist-oriented. So there was a kind of artistic edginess to this expo, and we put forward with a group of architects and a couple of Swiss architects this site around Yverdon, which is that area, and we specifically proposed the Blur building, which we just had this idea that we would make it count that the expo was on various lakes. And in fact, Jean Nouvel was on another lake, and he did a cube inside of the lake. But those two structures were the only ones that actually used the water as site. So we decided, why not have the water be the site, but also be the building material? And why not have it be the experience? And so the idea of making a building out of water vapor just really came out of the notion of just doing like the most with the least in a way. So all we had to do was basically do structure and plumbing, which is what is inside of every building. But that was it. There were no walls, there was no facade, there was no space. It was just all this kind of
Could you go in
medium.
it?
Yeah. There's two.
Could you see?
No, you could see very little. And so the
Great.
mist, there were 35,000 nozzles, and that basically there was a system that pumped water from the lake, and then filtered it, and then shot it through 35,000 nozzles. And these are fog nozzles that are usually used for irrigation. We also had a real-time responsive weather system. So there was a weather station that picked up the airspeed, the wind, the humidity, the dew point, the temperature, and so forth, and in real time responded by making it denser or making it less dense in various zones, and so it was learning in real time. Unfortunately, it took 6 months to train the thing to think for on its own, and then the expo was over. But one of the most interesting things, I think, about that project for us was we stepped off a cliff or out of an airplane with no parachute. So we won the competition to do this fog-based building, 500 feet out from shore. We had no idea that that water mist, that when you inhale atomized water, you basically have no mechanism in your biological system to filter out bacteria, right? Unlike your digestive system, where you eat something, you get food poisoning, and you cure yourself. Well, if you inhale anything with bacteria, you could get Legionnaire's disease. And we realized that we could kill off a whole population of Switzerland, not to mention all the visitors. And so we had to figure out how to filter this water so that it was not only like drinking water, it was purer than drinking water. So it went through filtration after filtration after filtration. You'd think that a Swiss lake would be pure. My God, no way. It was polluted. There were factories dumping chemical waste into it and human waste. And never mind the phytoplankton, which no one anticipated, which are these little microorganisms. And we actually didn't have a working system until we experimented on the this city's or the town's water system. You know, basically we just turned on the water system, and no one could flush toilets in the entire town because all the water was going in there. And then it seemed to work, and then we turned the water off, and then we started the lake water, and it worked. But before we opened, the building department there wanted to make sure that all of our sprinkler systems were intact. And the whole thing was a sprinkler system. Anyway, it was a very complicated experience.
More than you wanted to know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we have to call it a day. I want to thank
Oh.
Liz and thank all of you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.